Hello there, I'm going to go through the Treaty of Versailles just to make sure you understand this little section, okay? So, Treaty of Versailles, very important, comes up quite a lot as 10 markers, but can also come up as other questions as well, like 20 mark source questions too. It's worthwhile knowing. Okay, so Treaty of Versailles, we're looking at what was it and what effect did it have in Germany as well too, okay? So a bit of background, the sort of key facts about the treaty, and then the effects as well too. So. Uh, First of all, Germany surrendered obviously in 1918. It had been made a democratic republic, and you know that it was made a democratic republic on purpose because the um, the two German generals they didn't like democracy, but they feared communism more, and they did feel as well, more importantly, that if they made it democratic, it would curry favour of the Allies, especially the Americans, who were becoming like a bigger superpower than ever before. So what happened was they hoped the Allies would give them good terms because of that, and they met here at this beautiful palace of Versailles outside Paris in 1919, and this was signed in June 1919, just in case. Okay, alright, so the Allies took very different views on the peace terms, okay, depending on their experience. So the French, first of all, okay, they were understandably really, really angry in 1918. And why? Well, they'd actually been invaded twice. Don't forget that they'd been invaded twice. In the 1870s, they'd been invaded as well by the Prussians, which actually formed Germany after that. Okay, and that was a big humiliation. And then they'd been invaded, obviously, in 1914 through Belgium, and the Germans had occupied a huge amount of northeastern France during that time. Okay, and they'd really devastated a lot of it as well too. The French had also lost 1.4 million men. That is 30% of the male population between 18 and 45. That's a really big chunk out of the central male population within the demographics there. They'd also lost a huge amount of resources. Again, northeastern France, very industrial before the war. A lot of industry around there. Very important part of the French economy. Yet it was devastated by this here. A lot of the cities were occupied. They were deeply damaged. A lot of the towns and villages were destroyed completely. Agriculture was destroyed, industry was destroyed, and the Germans had a scorched earth policy through part of the war as well too. So they devastated places on purpose, so as it wouldn't be of use to the French. So in steps Clemenceau. So George Clemenceau is the French leader, okay, and he's determined that this is going to be a harsh treaty. He's determined that Germany is going to pay for this war. And he's also determined to make sure Germany can never again try to start another war. Okay, so that is his key aims. What he wants then is severe restrictions on German military. He wants removal of large parts of German territory to limit its power and to make France more secure. He wants reparations to pay for all that damage. He wants reparations to pay for all the destruction that Germany had caused during the war. And he also had a worry. He worried about this new Soviet Union, the USSR, in the east. The Western powers did worry about communism and where that was going to go afterwards. Germany was traditionally the bulwark against that. It's traditionally it could be regarded as the country that shields against Russia, but that is no longer the case, obviously. And France aims to then strengthen Poland at the expense of Germany, okay, and create a strong buffer against this Soviet Union. Alright, so the British. So the British also had suffered terribly in the war as well too. They had before the war been the world's largest creditor nation. They had assets and investments all over the world, all over their empire. By 1918, however, they were one of the largest debtor nations in the world, and the United States had very keenly taken over a lot of UK markets, and they'd also become the world's banker as well too. So they'd taken that mantle off London, and now New York and Wall Street is now the centre of the financial world. They had also lost almost 1 million men in their empire, from their empire, so it's something like 890 odd thousand men, so a huge loss for the British as well too. They had also lost resources, not as physical as France obviously, but 40% of their huge merchant fleet was destroyed during the war by U-boats, and Britain before the war had the largest merchant fleet in the world, so that was a big impact. Their Prime Minister Lloyd George was a little bit more strategic in his thinking than Clemenceau. He had a few things that he wanted, okay. He wanted Germany to be restricted, but not to the extent that France would then be able to dominate Europe. Europe and the continent of Europe, because Britain had always wanted this balance of power in Europe. It doesn't want a country that's too strong and would therefore be a threat to the United Kingdom. So they want Germany back as a strong trading partner, and also a kind of balance to France as well too. Before the war, Germany was probably the strongest trading partner of the United Kingdom, so they want that back. British public demanded, they'd lost so many people, they demanded a tough treaty. They supported the French demand for reparations, and they wanted Germany to repay until the pips squeaked. Okay, then you have the new kid on the block, the United States. So United States, Woodrow Wilson is the president, and he comes over, he's given a hero's reception, even though that the United States had only been involved in the war since April 1917, and their troops really only since 1918. But they were regarded as being the clincher, how the Allies had actually won, perhaps psychological more than anything else. So they had actually benefited hugely from the war, because they had actually, as I said before, they had taken over the markets previously dominated by European powers. They had become the largest creditor nation in the world, and they had supplied both sides of weapons and goods. Their president, because they hadn't lost too many men, he was actually very idealistic. He wanted a better world to come out of this old world, and he sets out his very idealistic 14 points. So it's a blueprint for the future of the world. It's based on self-determination. If you speak a certain language, if you follow a certain culture, that you should be allowed to determine your own future and be part of that type of country. Okay. He suggested a League of Nations. Remember, before the war, these alliance systems had pulled all these countries into war, some of them perhaps unwillingly. So a League of Nations would actually help to solve that problem, because it would encourage them to talk and encourage cooperation as well too. Okay, so that's self-determination aspect. He really wants that too. Remember, that is a problem, because they're going to cut off quite a lot of German territory, including German population, and that's going to end up on the wrong side of these borders. So this is something that's going to be controversial. Right, so what was in the Treaty of Versailles itself? Well, there's a couple of things it comes down to. The first thing is land, territory. Germany is forced to give up all its overseas territories, all its colonies. Now, there wasn't too many of those, but still it regarded that as part of its glory, this new empire that it was trying to build. It lost about 13% of its land, population as well too. It lost key territories like Alsace and Lorraine to France. It lost Schleswig to Denmark. That was after a referendum. Memel was given support. It was given to Lithuania, and the Saar region, a big coal mining region, was actually controlled by France under the League of Nations mandate. So they were allowed to control that and to take coal from that. The Rhineland, its natural border with France, it was actually demilitarized. They had to move all their soldiers from that area. It's kind of the natural border between France and Germany, and it was made to demilitarize. It also had to give up land to Poland, so they give Poland some land. I'll show you this in a second. That's to give them access, the Polish access to the sea, so they could export, and it's more financially and economically viable. But it also splits Germany in two. So this is called the Polish Corridor. Danzig, a German city, it was actually made a free port as part of this. It gives access to Poland as well too, to export. So this is the key area. So all the colonies were lost. And the Rhineland down here was demilitarized. Alsace and Lorraine, this territory here, which includes a lot of like steel factories, was given to France. Okay, now, France originally did own this, but it was given back to France. West Prussia, you can see here. Look at this split in Germany. So you have East Prussia over here, but it's West Prussia was actually taken off and given to Poland as part of this deal. Union of Austria, Anschluss. It's forbidden with Austria. Even though Austria is a German-speaking country, there's a fear that these two would unite. That's forbidden. Danzig up here was made the free port, and Schleswig up here was given to Denmark following a referendum. Almedi over here in Belgium, in Germany, was given to Belgium as part of that as well too, and Memel up here to Lithuania. So, economically, how did that there fare out? Well, economically, remember, if you're talking about this, try to remember that the territory, taking off the territory, will have economic effects. These are not terms of the treaty, but this is like effects from taking the land off. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so because they've taken the land off, Germany, it has economic effects. So how does that work out? Well, because they've taken off quite a lot of the land, 15% of its agriculture is actually lost. 16% of its coal, and coal was really big, economically important back then. A lot of factories ran on coal, so 16% of that was lost due to this as well too. Iron, again, a real big economic industrial mainstay. Half of that was lost due to these territorial changes. The Kill Canal was to be open to all as well too as part of this deal. What really angered the Germans was this war guilt clause. Germany was particularly angry at this because it was made to accept sole blame for the war. You cannot have liability without accepting blame, and they were given sole blame for the war. So they hated this. They did not believe that it was solely the Germans that created and started this war. So because they were forced to sign this here, Germany legally had to accept this the blame and pay reparations for this. So reparations is £6.6 billion, and it's paid annually. Okay, and that wasn't decided until 1921, but it's a huge amount of money to pay at a time when for Germany so economically impoverished after the war. So it also had to hand over its merchant fleet and to build ships for the Allies as part of this. This was to make up for the damage caused in the war, and it was obviously economically crippling for Germany as well too. Militarily, you can remember the French really wanted them pared back militarily. Well, this is important because it was only allowed 6 battleships, a key British term, no submarines, again a key British term, no air force. It wasn't allowed to have conscription, so it had over 7 million men serving in the war. It's not allowed to have conscription anymore. Okay, and it wasn't allowed any tanks, and its army was limited to 100,000 men. So it's a lot lower than what it actually was during the war. And there's also, I should say, there's no conscription as well too. So no conscription. Oh, it is up there. Yeah, no conscription. So up there, and you're forced to join the army too. Okay. Right. The way to remember this is learn every good reason Mia. Okay. So if you learn every good reason Mia, that'll help you remember. So land, economic, war guilt, militarily, and reparations. And again, if you're writing anything in this here, combine these together. So land and economy, they kind of go well together. Military's on its own. War guilt and reparations probably go together. So that's your paragraphs 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Alright, so Germans had not been allowed to be part of the treaty negotiations at all. The first time that they saw the treaty was whenever they got an idea of exactly what was in store for them. So they were particularly annoyed. They protested its harshness. They were particularly aggrieved at the war guilt clause and reparations demand, and they did not feel as if they were solely to blame for this war. So the politicians were presented with the treaty as a fait accompli, and the German politicians were forced to sign or face invasion. So German politicians raised the debate of what to do. The government resigned in protest. However, with the threat of invasion imminent and no military strength, on the 20th of June 1919 the treaty was signed. Hopefully that all makes sense. Okay, you probably could actually write about the effects of this treaty as well too. So obviously the Germans regard it as a diktat, a dictated peace, that they're forced to sign it or else be invaded. They hate the terms of it. They particularly hate the fact that they're blamed solely for the war and made to pay reparations for this war. The reparations is going to have huge economic effects. The treaty implications are that a lot of extremists are going to get they're going to get support from this here, because a lot of Germans feel hard done by, and it really is going to undermine democracy. Some historians feel that this end of World War I clearly leads, they believe, to World War II, because the grievance caused by Versailles certainly led to a growth in Hitler and a growth in Nazism. That's part of the road to the Second World War. Hopefully this makes sense. Thanks again for listening. I appreciate it.